It got to the point where I didn't even want to go to sleep because that when I wake up, it's the start of another day. And then it starts all over again. And that's when I knew, okay, this is really out of control.
Hello, you are listening to the Late Bloomer Living podcast. I'm Yvonne Marchese, your host, and I'm so happy you're here. I created this podcast to give you inspiration and let you know you're not alone in feeling stuck in midlife. I also invite you to join the Age Agitators Club for women, where we come together monthly to hatch our plans for making waves as we age. Being part of this community for women will remind you on a regular basis that you're not too old and it's never too late to do that thing you've been thinking about. You can find more information at latebloomerliving.com/community, and I hope to see you there. Hello, my friend. Oh my goodness. Mother's Day. This is part 2 in our celebration of Mother's Day. I felt like it needed some extra attention this year. And I'm so excited to have today's guest on. Her name is Lynnis Woods Mullins. She has a really fascinating story. After 25 years in corporate America, Lynnis was diagnosed with an anxiety disorder. And that diagnosis led her to find out ways to heal holistically. And then 1 year later, she decided to change her career completely, got certified as a holistic living and wellness coach for women over 40. And now 16 years later, she has empowered women through coaching programs, ebooks, webinars, all kinds of stuff. She created the Vibe brand, where she offers coaching and a Facebook group of over 23,000 women. I mean, come on. She's amazing. She is a powerhouse. And I was having a conversation with her recently where she was talking, I think it was a Women's History Month celebration, where we were asking about who are our sheroes in history, who are the women who have inspired us. And she had so many amazing things to say about her mother and her grandmother that I instantly knew that we needed to have a whole conversation here on the podcast about all the things, all the things. So here she is. Without further ado, here is Lynnis Woods Mullins. Lynnis, thank you so much for being with me today.
Well, thank you for that introduction. You have such a beautiful light about you and personality that just makes people want to come through the screen and just hug you. You're just
Oh,
wonderful.
I'll take the hug. Thank
You're
you.
just precious. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Oh my goodness. Well, let's start off by talking about your mom and your grandma and how they influenced you, if you don't mind. Let's just dive right into that.
Well, my mom and grandma is really interesting because they, of course, come from two other generations. We're talking about me and then my mom and then my grandmother. And the thing that's so interesting about them is that so much has happened in terms of how we live our lives as women since they were women.
Oh, yeah.
I think probably there's more differentiation now than any other time. I mean, if my grandmother was still alive, she probably would be scratching her head trying to relate to what it's like to be a woman now. I
Right?
think when my mom was alive and, my grandmother was alive, there was some differentiation, but not that much. It's interesting because I think my grandmother and my mom were just being, women in the time that they were in, and didn't realize what an impact they actually had on me and my sisters, especially as we got older, because we began to realize how special and different they really were in some ways. My mom was an educator and had gone to college and then later got her grad degree. My grandmother had her undergrad degree and she was a teacher or educator as well. And the thing I admired about them both is that they not only had their own careers, but they were also active in their community. They were excellent homemakers, excellent cooks. They sewed, they played the piano, both of them at their churches. My mom
Wow.
sang in a choir. My mom was involved in activism, and my grandmother was as well. And well, both grandmothers on my father's side and on my mother's side, one of my grandmothers was the very first African American president for the YWCA in Georgia, for the state of Georgia. She was the very first president. My grandmother on my mother's side was one of the very first presidents of the PTA for her region in Georgia. And that was after my mother had already grown up and left. So they had a strong sense of community for their church and for the cities they lived in. And I admired that. But the other piece was that they had such a great yin and yang. They had this professional side, their community side, and then their homemaking side. As I mentioned, they even sewed. I can remember my mom making my dresses, which was like, I was kind of embarrassed by that. But actually, back then in the 60s, it was a thing. You know, you would go to the artist shop and you had butterick patterns and all that kind of stuff. That was a big deal back then. And she was an excellent seamstress. I can remember one year her making all of my school clothes, and I was kind of embarrassed because my mom made my school clothes. But everybody's like, "Where'd you get that? Where'd you get that outfit?" You know, because so she was not only a great seamstress, but she was creative in terms of where she would find her fabrics, and she would do a little designing on the side. My mother was an artist. You know, she had a
Wow.
beautiful voice when she sang. And my other grandmother, both of them, after my parents got married, they provided such a great example because even though we lived in California and they lived in Georgia, they were friends. They lived maybe about 70 miles from each other, but they would visit each other on the weekends, visit each other's churches. And the other thing that's really interesting, which I think was kind of a competitive thing between them, back then it was a big deal if the pastor came to your house for dinner, right?
Oh, yeah.
Both of them had their own pastors come to their house for dinner quite often. And when we would go down to visit them, because my sisters and I would go down every single summer until I was in college. And by the time I was in college, I was actually there because I ended up going to the same college that my mother went to. And every summer we, would have dinner, and at least one Sunday a month, each of them would have the pastors come to join. It was just a big deal. They, threw out a big spread and all that kind of stuff. But I admired how they juggled everything. And the other thing is that they
My
were
gosh,
beautiful.
they did.
Yes, they
Yeah.
did. And they were
Yeah.
beautiful women, always well dressed, hair just right. And I don't think I ever heard my grandmothers or my mom really complain about all the things that they were juggling. I don't think I ever really heard them complain. And I know they got tired at times. I'm sure they did. They were such drivers. But I think their goal was not just to provide for their family, but to be a certain example for their children and then for their grandchildren, or in my mom's case, for us. And it wasn't until I had my own children that I really began to appreciate my mom. And the sad thing about it was that my mother died when I was 31. She
Mm.
was 56, and I had just had my third child, and she was hit by a fire truck on her way to work. She was in her
Oh,
car, she had the green, and it was just an accident. But you know what? I decided it's been 35 years, since I've seen my mom. But I decided this year that I was going to tell a different story in terms of her death. And, it impacted us greatly. It changed our lives forever. My grandmother lost her only daughter. My father lost his wife of, I think they had been married like 37, 38 years at
mm.
the time when she passed. But I would not be doing what I'm doing today if it was not for that, because I developed an anxiety disorder and I wanted to figure out how to get better. And I took some time off from work and started studying about holistic practices and all this stuff. And when it was time for me to return, I decided I wouldn't do it and that I would.
What were you doing, Linus, before you stepped away from the work you were doing or the job that you had? What was that work?
Um, I had been in human resources for 25 years. And the last job I had, I was director for recruitment for an HMO. I was in charge of physician and nurse recruitment, and totally different job. I think the only skill I took with me is that well, probably a lot of skills, but the main was I interviewed people all the time. I was always talking to people all the time. And my organizational skills and my ability to manage a lot of different people. I had hundreds of people under me, and it was a big job. And the anxiety came from two things. The first thing was that was very traumatic, what happened to my mom. And the way I found out about it was very traumatic. I had just seen her maybe an hour ago. I was on maternity leave at the time, and I had been by her house to pick up my clothes because, of course, you know how technically challenged I am. My dryer was down. Okay. So I was using her dryer. And so I went to go and pick up the clothes for the baby for the dryer. And she asked me, she said, "Is that my scarf you have on?" And I was like, "Oh, Mom, it was her scarf." "No, Mom, it's not her scarf." She said, "It looks like my scarf." I said, "Really? I don't know." She said, "Okay, well, I'll talk to you later about the scarf." I said, "Okay." That was the last words that we had.
Wow.
And I went to my office to show them the baby, who at that time was 6 weeks old. And my dad knew I was going to the office. This was before cell phones. He knew I would be there. And he just called me to let me know what had happened, that Mom had been in an accident and please go home. And so I said, okay. So I went home to their house. I'm waiting. My grandfather, my father's father, is visiting from Georgia at that time. And I was getting nervous. I felt something. And I said, well, let me call my mom's office. And, back then they had Rolodexes, and see if her secretary can get me some telephone numbers of my friends, because I couldn't remember any numbers. And my Franklin planner, I had left at the office in a rush and I couldn't remember any numbers. So I called and I said, I need to get some numbers. I said, and could you go to my mom's Rolodex and get some numbers? She said, yeah. She said, I understand. It's so tragic. She said, Lynnis, we loved your mother. And I said, loved, like past tense. And I said, you mean she's dead? And she said, oh, she thought I knew. I didn't know. The
Oh my
accident happened
gosh.
right up the street from where she worked. And everybody knew that they heard the impact when it happened. And
Oh,
when they ran out there to see, I mean, there's no way that anybody would have survived that, even though they worked on her for a long time. And that began my need to control the outcome. No matter what, there will never be any surprises, subconsciously. And finally, about, 25 years later, I realized that I had developed this anxiety disorder. Every single morning when I would wake up, I would feel like I was going straight downhill on a roller coaster with no restraints every single morning. And the only thing
mm.
that would stop it would be a cup of coffee. And that's when I started drinking coffee, when I was, in my 40s. So anyway, when I went to try to get better and to get rid of that, I found out that I had anecdotal anxiety, but I also had something else that, doctors don't really tell you
Can
about.
I stop you and can you say
Yes.
that again? Any dope?
Anecdotal, yes,
What is that?
meaning that the antidote was my mom's accident that began to cause. It was my experience, the trauma. One of the key symptoms of trauma is anxiety. A lot of people don't know that. One of the key things of post-traumatic stress is anxiety. So I was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress, and the antidote was, or what brought it about was, how I found out about my mom. So I had that anecdotal anxiety, it came from a particular event where I was able to identify it, through therapy. But the other piece that I didn't know about, and so it's kind of a double whammy. I was in menopause by 51, 52, and there's such a thing as menopausal anxiety. And menopausal anxiety is because of an imbalance of hormones, too much cortisol, not enough estrogen, whichever one it is. And in the morning, when you first wake up, your cortisol levels are usually pretty high. And one of the symptoms is a feeling of anxiety. So I had like that double whammy.
I'm raising my hand right now. Yes, that has been my experience. I am
Yes.
menopausal. Yeah.
And I, no one had told me, none of the doctors, therapists, no one. It was actually a holistic doc after I started doing what I'm doing now. Maybe I was 5 years into it, that finally diagnosed me properly.
Mm.
And once I've learned that, then I began on the road of recovery. But I got into what I'm doing now because of what I went through. And I just didn't want, I wanted to be able to help women through that piece, not so much the trauma piece, but that menopausal piece that a lot of the doctors that are traditionally trained aren't talking about, or that anxiety or stress piece. And they're just saying, oh, you're just busy. But no, usually it's grounded in something. This doesn't come from nowhere. And we as women, carry so much of that. And if we have feelings of anxiety or worry, whatever, we don't really talk about it. We just kind of swallow it and push it back. And the thing with anxiety is, the more you try to push it back and not deal with it, the more it comes back with a
Comes
vengeance.
back to get
And
you.
I
Yeah.
had gotten so bad that I was afraid to go and check the mailbox because I couldn't control what might be in there. You know, one of my tests to see where I am on my anxiety level is that when I get mail, do I open it right away? And I do. Whatever it is, oh, mail, let me open it right away. because it's proving to myself that I am no longer in that place.
Mm.
But, it was my mother and my grandmothers that taught me about resilience, even in their deaths, that taught me about the importance of family and the importance of a woman having her own career, her own life, and which was very unusual because, my mom grew up in the 40s, 50s, my grandparents in the 20s,
You come
30s.
from a line of educators. So I find it
Yes,
really interesting that now you have a podcast. You have what you're doing is educating people
right.
about holistic things. So I can totally see that lineage coming down. And I'm
Yeah,
now
definitely.
it's all suddenly very clear to me. You're why you're so amazing.
Well, you know what? I have to tell you that this month, and I don't know when this will air, but this month denotes 17 years in doing what I'm doing.
Wow.
And when I first got started, I didn't really know what I was going to do. All I know is that I wanted to help women, and I didn't know how I was going to do it, but I decided I was going to do it virtually, which back then was almost unheard of.
Hey, we're going to take a quick break here so I can tell you about an awesome resource that I think you're going to love. Here's the thing. We are always works in progress. Do you find yourself wondering, what do I want to be when I grow up? If so, then I think you're going to want to subscribe to We're All Getting Older, which is a weekly newsletter written by Lou Blazer that's all about continuing to grow and get better in the second half of our lives. We're All Getting Older is a sponsor for this podcast, and I'll tell you, I get so much benefit from reading Lou's newsletter every week, and I think you will too. She writes the newsletter for midlifers who believe in getting better as we get older and making the most of life's second half. So if you want to subscribe to that, it is on Substack, and you can easily find a link to subscribe at loublazer.com. That's loublaser.com. And now back to our regularly scheduled programming. There's something that's just like burning a hole in my brain right now. And that question is, for the anxiety, what did you find holistically that has worked for you in managing that
Oh my
anxiety?
gosh, so many things. In fact, I created a coaching program around this. Aromatherapy, yoga, meditation, breathing, EFT, energy healing, movement, certain kinds of foods sometimes could be helpful. SAMe, which is a supplement that helps to trigger the production of a certain chemical in the brain that stops being produced as often, that has to do with your mood. Yes, SAMe. SAMe is wonderful. How I found out about it was a friend of mine who happened to be a gynecologist. She was not talking to me in terms of my health. She was saying that when she was in medical school and living in Seattle, she had anxiety. And her professor said, as you get older, there's a chemical in the brain called SAMe that stops producing. He said, but you're really not that old. So probably what's happening is you're not getting enough sunlight. Yeah, she's in Seattle, raining all the time. He said, and that when you have a lot of sun, then it helps to trigger the SAMe to produce. But if you don't have a lot of sun, then more than likely you need a little bit of help. Try SAMe. So she said, so Lynnis, you might want to try SAMe.
Can you spell that for me? Because I'm not
Yeah.
sure. I don't know if
It's
I've ever heard of it.
capital SAM and then capital E. That's the
Oh,
chemical compound name of it, SAMe.
oh, okay. Never heard
Yes.
of it before. All
Yeah.
right.
And I'm telling you, that's what made the difference, because on top of the fact that my hormonal levels were going up and down, my brain was probably not producing enough SAMe. Now, I would get enough sunshine, but the other thing about SAMe is that it's also good for a good liver cleanse. It helps to detox your liver, and it helps with your joints as well. So for whatever reason, I had a little bit less of that SAMe than what I needed. And when I would take it, that anxious feeling would begin to subside because it is a natural mood enhancer.
Is that
So
something a
that
doctor
supplement,
can test for? Can you get like blood tests done and
yeah,
get
I think
tested
you have to
for
do
your
like a 12
levels?
panel, like a 12 panel or something. I
Uh-huh.
don't know if you would have to tell them in particular that you wanted to see if the chemical SAMe is showing up in your blood reports at all. So it was a combination of things. And the
Yeah.
more I started getting into how to holistically heal myself, the more I became convinced that I wanted to help other women do it as well. So my first programs were on anxiety and stress during menopause. And people say, well, what happens a lot with women? We think that that's just how it is, the stress part. Of course, your multiple activities, whatever,
Like
all
who
this
doesn't have stress, right?
doesn't have stress, right?
Yeah.
But the offshoot of that is how it impacts our body over time. There's a book called The Body Keeps a Score. I keep it on I don't know where it is now, but I keep it near me all the time because it talks about how trauma and day-to-day stresses are recorded by the body and
Hmm.
they present in different kinds of ways, which inevitably could be ultimately the reason why we die. It starts out with a chronic disease like diabetes or heart disease or something like that, but could be prevented or perhaps could not be as extreme if we would really be aware of minimizing the stress in our life. You can't get rid of it, I guess, completely, but you can do things to offset the impact of stress in your life. That's why I got into yoga. That's why I learned about breathing. That's why I learned about meditation and aromatherapy and
Meditation
all the
for
things.
me has been huge. Yoga's been
Yes,
huge. Like
yes.
just it's amazing. It's amazing. I think I started, let me see, I'm 55 now. So it's been a good solid 5 to 6 years since I started meditating every day. Like,
Mhm.
and I had dabbled, Linus, I had dabbled into the meditation and I knew I wanted to do it more, but it just never, it was like, who has time? I had young kids at the time. It was and a job and but they say if you say you're too busy to meditate, you need the meditation even to make the time for meditation even more. And my kid, 2 weeks ish or a month after I started doing a morning practice, my kid who was probably 10 or 12 at the time I woke him up one morning for school and he had no idea what I was doing with my morning routine. And he randomly just looked at me and he said, "You seem happier, Mom."
Mm.
And
So
that was everything I needed to know that I needed to keep going with that. And then I don't know, maybe a year ago or a little bit more, I'm not sure when, but I asked my husband, I was like, "Hey, I just want to check on this with you. Do I seem better? Do I handle stress better than I used to? Is it just me? Am I doing better or am I imagining that?" And he was like, "No, you definitely handle things better." And I was like, "Okay, okay, it's not
yes,
just me thinking
yes.
this."
Yes. And there was something else you were thinking that reminded me in terms of the stress levels. As we get older, especially going through the menopause, our sleep patterns are usually interrupted. We're waking up in the
Mm.
middle of the night to go back to sleep because our cortisol levels are elevated. I started taking magnesium citrate to help with my sleep. In fact, there's a combination of supplements I take to help me with balancing my hormones, trying to prevent additional weight gain or maybe even lose it, and to help me with brain fog and sleep. And it's a combination of the magnesium citrate, inositol, and sodium butyrate.
Mm.
And I tell you, and when I don't take those three every single day because I want to be careful to let the body do what it's going to do. I listen to my body a lot to figure out, okay, do I need to take this today? So I might take it like every other day, but I can tell when I haven't taken it. It also helps with cravings as well, because normally the cravings, they come with a vengeance, well, just like it used to be when you were pregnant. With menopause, and many times we give in to our cravings thinking, oh, well, it's kind of like you beat yourself up about it, but you just can't help yourself. You're there, in the cabinet looking for something
What
to
are
meet
your
that craving.
cravings, Linus? What's your
Yeah.
guilty pleasure?
Oh my gosh, chocolate. And usually when I'm craving chocolate, that lets me know that I'm probably low on my magnesium glutamate. And so I make sure that I get enough of that. But these are all things that I learned and studied as a result of what happened with my mom. So when I think about my mom's legacy, and what she did for me, she gave me my business of 17 years. She gave me the ability to be able to literally help hundreds of women over the last 17 years, and to have hundreds of thousands of followers on the internet who listen to my podcast and, read my social media, and who I truly do believe in many cases I have helped a lot of women to have not just hope, but to get motivated to do something with what's going on with them, instead of just kind of pushing it back to that back burner. Then you go back to finally deal with it. And there's so much that you just kind of get overwhelmed and either don't do anything or
I
end up
think
getting really sick.
Yeah, yeah. I think so much of it is, well, this is and two, you go to the doctor and you've got complaints and they're like, well, you're getting older. And everybody just thinks, oh, well, it's
That's just
just
the way it
aging.
is.
It's just the way it is. It's aging. Suck it up, move on. Or, without looking at, well, what can I do
Right.
to feel better? What do I
Exactly.
need? What do I need what can I do? And it's hard to do that because you got to get real honest with yourself to make changes, and you have to be willing to make those changes. We all know what the changes are, right? It's just
It's implementation. I always say that, knowledge is power, definitely.
Mhm.
But acting on that knowledge is powerful. That's the
Yes.
difference.
I think the trick is like one thing at a time,
Yes,
too.
incrementally, many times incremental changes can make a huge difference. The problem can be, or the challenge can be, in not dealing with it, even the small things that can grow into larger things. I know with my anxiety for years, I didn't even recognize it as such until the point where it was so bad that the anxiety would finally go away at sundown, because I found out later through therapy that when the sun was down, the banks were closed, the stores were beginning to close, all my kids were home with me, my husband was home. The world kind of stopped for the next few hours. And it got to the
Mm,
point where I didn't even want to go to sleep, because that when I wake up, it's the start of another day. And then it starts all over again. And
mm.
that's when I knew, okay, this is really out of control. When the reality is, the anxiety probably started not too long after my mom's death, but I just would not allow myself to address it and put everybody else's needs before mine. And what happens sometimes, just like with your closet in the hallway or your closet in your bedroom, you throw things in the closet, you say, oh, I'll get to it later, then get to it later, get to it later. Then one day you open the closet and it just all comes out,
Mhm.
and you can't put it back in. And that's what happened to me. One day I tried to throw something into the emotional closet and it just all came out. And I was still working at the time, and I went away for 1 week for a respite. And that's when I realized that I needed more than 1 week. And I took that year off. And I worked in the medical industry, health industry, as an administrator. So I could take that sabbatical and still keep my job. So
Oh,
I took that
wow.
sabbatical, and on the day I was due to come back, I called my boss and I said, you know what? I can't come back. I want to do something else. And I said, I don't even want to come back to my office. Just please pack everything up. And he was like, what? You know, but 17 years later, it's the best thing I could have ever done. And I tell you, it was a walk of faith. It really, really was. But when you're operating in your passion, when you discover the reason why you're supposed to be here, and begin to earn a living doing that, there's nothing better in the world than that. I
When
don't
you s-
regret it.
Yeah, when you stepped away, when you left work and you went on your sabbatical, how long did it take you to find holistic solutions for yourself? And then from finding the solutions for yourself, at what point did you decide to start offering that out to help other people?
It's so funny. It's really kind of a funny story. My husband wanted to help me in my business. So he got me on Voice America, which was an internet radio station network. It was very expensive to get on there. Authors and celebrities and all that stuff was on there. So I started doing internet radio, like podcast or whatever. Same thing as a podcast, basically. And I would have on all kinds of people in the wellness industry. and they would send me the books that they had written. And so I started reading the books, um, figured out where I could go to get certified in certain things because I'm telling you, I was starting from scratch. So it took me years to figure out what I wanted to teach, how I wanted to teach it. And then once I figured out the demographic I wanted to appeal to, the majority of women weren't even online like that. You know, they really didn't start getting online in our generation until much later, in 2015, 2016.
Yeah.
And I started in 2008. So it
Yeah.
was quite a journey. When I hear these people talking about, and I guess now it's much more plausible. Oh, you can make six figures in 6 months. It's like, yeah, maybe. But I'm telling you, even if now they have platforms to help you, coaches and all this stuff, so much, I didn't have any benchmark because no one was doing what I was talking about doing. They had a site called Mind Body Green, which was a huge site, still around today, that
Mhm.
is a wellness site from a holistic perspective for men and women. And I wanted to do something from a holistic perspective for just women over 40. That was not happening. And I wanted to figure out how to help women without ever actually meeting them. The demographic I wanted to work with didn't even know what that could possibly be like. They didn't know what Zoom was. I had a long little pamphlet on how to work with me when I would sign someone, how to get on Zoom and, how to, all this different stuff. So there were just a lot of things, but you know what? Ignorance is bliss. I didn't know what I didn't know. But as I found out more about wellness and as I started getting my certifications and getting educated and speaking, and my podcast was like the top rated podcast for wellness on the network. And, I started getting sponsors, all this kind of stuff. I was like, okay, I can do this. I can do this. I can do this. And my husband's like, okay, well, you've been saying I can do this for 5 years. The goal was to replace your income within a couple of years. So and I did I doubled my income. I mean, tripled now. But back then, it wasn't even about the money. Although I'm sure my husband was like, hurry up, hurry up. He's doing all the heavy lifting. But he realizes now that had I not done this, I definitely would look far older than I am now, if I would even still be around, because I was also suicidal at that time when I was in the throes of anxiety. I went through a lot of issues around even wondering if it was worth being here on earth kind of thing.
Mhm.
So my mom, in her own way, saved my life.
Wow.
And I would never be doing what I'm doing now had I not been through experiencing, such a dramatic event. And so that's the story I'm telling now when I think about her death. Before it was all about the fire truck and everything else, but now it's all about the women that I know I have inevitably helped as a
Yeah.
result.
And I'll venture out to say, Linus, that I think that you know, who she was in her lifetime was, I mean, that to me, that she was an educator, that she was a homemaker at the same time, that she was active in the community. She was like this complete example to you.
He was a complete example.
When
When she
you
passed,
can see that and you can see what to live into, that is an amazing thing, isn't
it's
it?
amazing. I'm looking at one of the plaques. She got many plaques when she died. The California State Legislature closed down for half a day during her funeral services and all that. But I'm looking at one of the plaques from the organizations that she belonged to, and it was anyway from her Greek sorority organization all the way to a law organization to reading efficacy. I mean, on everything in between. There's like 15 different organizations on this one plaque. I have others, but this is the one that I look at every day. And it just reminds me about the importance of not just giving back, but the importance of being engaged.
Mm.
I think my mom felt a very strong responsibility to not just educate, but to stand as an example of, of being of service. And I think the reason why I survived so long, in this business is that I have always been of service first. What can I do to serve?
Yeah, I think when you
You
can
know,
find how you can serve, it's, I mean, it's the kind of thing that looks like you're helping other people, but finding a way to be of service is really the thing that saves us.
Yes. Yes. And I believe it creates that energy that, God, the universe, whatever you want to call it, just takes care of me.
Yeah.
I managed to, buy new cars, keep my home, pay off my home. I mean, so many things have happened in 17 years when I think about it. When I started, I had one daughter on her way to college and two others right behind her, and another one like in another 3 or 4 years. And they all got through
Made
college.
it through.
They
You
have
made
no
it
student
through.
loan debt. I don't know. I look back and say, how did you do this? It's the grace of God. And because I was operating in my gifting and being obedient to what he told me I was supposed to be doing. And there were many times when I wanted to stop, many times when I'm like,
Faith
but
and
I
chutzpah are the two words that are coming up for me
faith
right
and
now.
chutzpah. Yeah, yeah.
Faith and chutzpah.
Yeah.
Yes.
You know what? It's interesting because when I have conversations like this, which aren't very often, I don't think about the accumulation of work. I wouldn't even know where to start. It's probably on the hard drive of at least 5 or 6 computers, before we had clouds to back up to and everything. But I did decide that this time around I would celebrate my 17th year in business. So I posted something about it on social media. And the comments that I got, I was just so shocked because I was just doing it just to be doing it, actually for content, so that I can like put together a story of why I got into business to lead them to my new membership site. That's what I was thinking of. I wasn't thinking that anybody was going to like say anything. Oh my God. The the comments just blew. I mean, I fell to my knees and started crying because I didn't think anybody noticed. I know my
Oh,
clients did, but just in general, I didn't think anybody really noticed, or if they did, they forgot or whatever. And the things they said were just fuel in my tank.
that's amazing. This has been an amazing conversation. Thank you so much for sharing the background of everything about how you got started. And, I know that entrepreneurship is not easy for anybody. And here you are 17 years later and you've done it. How can people find you, Lynnis? What's the easiest way for somebody to seek
Well,
you out?
the best way, I guess, is to go to vibewellnesswoman.com. And right now, if you go there, it'll say coming soon, a brand new site, but it also has my link tree on there. So you can click on my link tree and you can click on my podcast. And that's the best way to find me because on my link tree is all my information. I think there's a Gmail on there or whatever. But the new membership site, which will be my only site, will be coming real soon. And I'm very excited about it.
That's very exciting. Love the work you're doing, Lynnis, and I'm so glad that we have connected the
Me
way that we have
too.
in the past couple of months. It's been great getting to know
It's been
you.
fun.
So
Yes.
we got to stay in touch, lady. Thank you.
We
Thank you.
will.
Anybody, if you're driving, don't worry. I will have links for you in the show notes. And Lynnis, thank you.
Thank you too.
Well, there you have it. I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Lynnis as much as I did. And that wraps up our 2-part Mother's Day series. I just kind of like the whole tie-in of these generations of connections of women from one to the next, reaching forward, reaching back. There's so much power there. Women are powerful. Man, I love it. Anyway, thank you so much for being with me here to the end. If you want more information about Lynnis Woods Mullins, I will have that for you in the show notes. You can just go to latebloomerliving.com/podcast and look for episode 186. Thanks so much for listening. I hope you have a fantastic week. Stay safe and well. Talk soon.